The British government does Brexit by speeches, the EU prefers documents. This is the latest addition from Brussels to the hefty Brexit files, draft guidelines setting out how the EU Council sees future trade and cooperation with the UK. What is the EU offering? The UK is offered tariff-free trade in goods, but only if both sides agree to maintain existing rights to fishing waters, a blow to the ambitions of the Environment Secretary, Michael Gove, and other Brexiters who campaign on the promise of taking back control of British waters. The trade deal would also cover services, but officials say these provisions are limited to what is currently on offer to non-EU countries such as Canada. The draft text also makes calls for cooperation on defense, security and foreign policy, as well as a future partnership on police and judicial cooperation. An agreement is envisaged on aviation, but the EU wants data protection to remain subject to EU rules. All these strands of the UK and EU's post-Brexit ties will be shaped by the EU's now familiar guiding principles: no cherry picking, respect of the EU legal order and, the clincher, that being outside the club can never be as good as being a member. Is this a rebuff to Theresa May? The Prime Minister has been urging the EU not to shoehorn the UK into existing trade models designed for countries that are much smaller or more distant. In her latest speech, at Mansion House, May called for trade to be as frictionless as possible and for a highly streamlined customs arrangement, concepts dismissed by a senior EU official as nebulous. The EU document does not mention May's favored concept of a comprehensive system of mutual recognition, where the two sides would maintain open access to each other's markets by sharing the same standards. To the EU that sounds like single market light or customs union light, something deemed unfair and unworkable. But not all British ideas have been flatly rejected. UK associate membership of key EU agencies on medicine, aviation and chemicals has not been ruled out, although MEPs, who will vote on the final trade deal, think this should be off the table. What if the UK changes its Brexit plan? In a line that will give hope to those pursuing a soft Brexit, the EU includes a get-out clause. If, the UK, positions were to evolve, the Union will be prepared to reconsider its offer, states the text. One commentator immediately christened this the Corbyn Clause, a reference to the Labour leader's announcement that he would keep the UK inside a customs union, but the clause has an expiry date. The EU does not envisage reopening discussions after the EU and UK strike a deal on the terms of the future relationship in October. What happens now? The document will be parsed and picked over by diplomats from the EU's 27 countries to pave the way for agreement on the final text at a summit of European leaders on 22 to 23 March. The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, will then have a mandate to start negotiations on a broad brush outline of a trade deal, ahead of agreement text that will be separate from the UK's EU divorce treaty. While Wednesday's 6-page document is the seed of a future free trade agreement, fully fledged trade talks will not begin until the UK leaves the EU in March 2019. The final trade deal will take years to negotiate, predicted at anywhere between 21 months to 5 years, depending on optimism levels. Where does this leave Brexit negotiators? Meanwhile, the grind of Brexit negotiations continues. The EU is urging the UK to speed up work on completing the Brexit withdrawal agreement, a separate text covering money, EU citizens and an emergency plan for avoiding a hard border on the island of Ireland. This latest document contains the EU's favourite warning that trade talks will not progress without finalising the divorce. Nothing is agreed until everything is agreed.